Today, and in studio with us now, the CEO for the Mississippi Center for Public Policy, Douglas Carswell, joins us again. Douglas, how are you this morning?
Dave, it's wonderful to be here. I'm great.
Well, you're always so up.
Because I'm in America, because it's a wonderful place to be.
Are you adjusting well?
Do you know, I've been here a year, and I still wake up every morning and think, what an amazing place I'm in. It really is. The greatest state in the greatest country on earth. It's a privilege to be here.
We're not going to disagree with you on that. We're not going to argue that one bit. You've been here for a year. Now, admittedly, you made this change and came to a new country and a new job in the most tumultuous time in the history of the world, it feels like some days. So you jumped straight into the deep end without your floaties on. Give us a review. How has it been for you this year?
It has been a wonderful year. I have to say, I think probably one of the most enjoyable years in all of my 50 years. Coming to America has been, I didn't quite know what I was letting myself in for. I didn't know what I was letting my family in for. And of course, it took 6 months before my family could join me. They didn't get here till, just before July the 4th. But what an extraordinary year it has been for all of us. I've been introduced to football. I hadn't watched a single game of football before this year, and now I love it. The food, the hospitality, the way of life. This is a truly wonderful place to live. And I've had the most amazing 12 months.
And it's great to have you. We love having you here. We love having new people come in because then they turn into evangelists. If you just come here and stay for a little while, you become an evangelist for the state of Mississippi.
I am an evangelist for the state of Mississippi, no doubt about it.
Now, at the Center for Public Policy, again, it's been a busy time. It's been a busy year. Touch on some of the things that have gone on this year that kind of stick out to you.
I think for us as an organization, the highlight was probably the publication of a report into critical race theory in September. One of the things that makes America so great is this notion that everyone's an individual and everyone's an American, and to coin a phrase, all men are created equal. Critical race theory attacks and undermines all of that. It destroys the thing that makes America so great. And so I felt really strongly about this as a new arrival. I wanted us to publish a report that shows that critical race theory is being promoted in the state of Mississippi, and this is wrong. The best disinfectant is sunlight, and our report, I think, shines a strong ray of sunlight into where critical race theory is being taught and proposes sensible things to do to stop it. We do need to stop it because critical race theory, if it's allowed to continue, will demotivate and disorientate this great country and tear it apart. So publishing that, for me, was a highlight. We also produced something called the Mississippi Fat Cat Report. This was every time we have a conversation, Dave, about public sector pay, it always becomes a conversation about how much higher taxes should be. Our report actually looked at the senior public sector officials' top salaries, and it shocked me as the author of the report. It showed that actually the 50 highest paid public officials in the state of Mississippi, it's not the governor, it's not who you would expect. It's often people who preside, often school superintendents presiding over failing school boards. And I think publishing this report showing the money is there. There's been a 54% increase in per pupil spending in the state of Mississippi since the 1990s. But that money just hasn't gone into teachers' pay or the classroom. It's been hoovered up by these fat cats. And I think we need to shine a spotlight and reveal this and stop it. The money's there. We don't need higher taxes. We need to spend public money in the interests of the public, not the public sector fat cats.
Well, and that's the thing. We have a lot of different areas, and school districts are one of them, where we are top-heavy when it comes to the expenditure of the money. And that report did give a great example, many examples of exactly what we're talking about here. And like you said, until we start talking about it, nothing can change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we've got to turn the conversation around from saying, is the failure of, for example, particularly the education sector in Mississippi, is that failure, that failure is not a lack of money. And we've got to move the conversation on from that. As long as the progressives can make us think that it's all about more money, we're never going to improve these public services. We've hosed huge amounts of money at them. The problem is, to coin a phrase that the left loves, systemic. There's not any choice and competition in the provision of education for many, many people, many, many mums and dads in Mississippi. And until we change that, we're never going to get an improvement in outcomes.
Well, you've talked about a couple of things already that I think really underline one of the fundamental issues that we're dealing with right now in America, and that's the fact that, and I see this term used, and I almost always groan when I see it, but there is something to it. We are in the middle of a civil war right now because there is a faction of America that wants to destroy the America we know. And they're doing everything they can through critical race theory, through suggesting what they consider to be easy, emotionally based fixes to problems that don't actually fix the problems. And all of this stuff can compound and get us to the point where we have real problems before it's over with, I'm afraid.
The radical progressive left wants the sort of people that are listening to this show right now to give up, to lose hope, to think there's nothing we can do to change things, nothing we can do to turn America around. But actually, the silent majority, if they don't stay silent, can turn this around. About 30, 40 years ago, America was in exactly this situation where the radical left was telling America from its perch point in D.C. that America was in decline. A guy called Ronald Reagan came along and he hadn't read that memo, and people flocked to him and he turned this country round. We need a movement like that. We need ordinary Americans, millions of ordinary Americans, to say, no, I'm not going to have people teach my kids to judge other Americans on the basis of their race. I'm not going to allow people to denigrate America's past. This is the greatest country. This is a country with a very proud history. Yes, it's made mistakes, but if you think America's made mistakes, wait till you hear about other countries. America's history is a moral achievement compared to the story of almost every other country on this earth.
Yeah, and this is coming from a guy from England. You know a thing or two about that.
Yeah, I've lived in Central Africa. I've lived in Europe. I've lived in England. In England, there's a very famous poet called Rudyard Kipling who wrote a poem with the phrase, "What do they know of England who only England know?" What do they know of America that only America know? Perhaps having that experience of seeing the world as an outsider, seeing America as an outsider, I can appreciate America with a vividness that perhaps sometimes people who've only ever known America can't see. You know, it strikes me that here in Mississippi, there's an extraordinary goodwill and civility between people of different heritages. If you think that there's not that civility, go spend a day in London. I mean, America has far more civic togetherness than any other country I've ever lived in.
And that's a powerful statement. But when you're born here, when you grow up with it, when you grow up in it, you kind of lose sight of that. And you kind of have a little less defense against the people that want to tell you that America is horrible.
This is why I find the radical progressive liberal left who sit in liberal university campuses teaching young Americans to despise their own country, they don't know much about the world, because if they knew much about the world, they would recognize that America is special and worth preserving. People, I find in America, young Americans are taught to believe their country is built on hatred and racism. This is simple nonsense. And anyone like me who stood in an immigration queue to come into America and looked down the line of people from every culture, every country, every color, every continent, trying to come to America to make this country their home, anyone who's ever done that, as I have, would know that actually America's not based on hatred and racism. America is the last great hope of humankind, and it is today, and it always has been. That's why people want to come here and make it their home. They're not trying to break into Mexico. They're not trying to get into Russia or France or China. They're trying to come to America because America is special. Don't ever destroy what makes America special.
You talked about the silent majority, and I have had this expression, phrase, whatever you want to call it, that I've said for a while. We have gotten so caught up in the polarization of politics and everything else that we have forgotten a very simple truth. Out of that polarization, the far, far right, the far, far left, you add those together, that represents about 20% of the population. Everybody else falls somewhere in the middle, and they don't get the press. They don't get the headlines. They don't get on television, on the networks. And as a result, I think even here we have a misconception of what America is now, and we have to turn that back around and realize what we have.
Yeah. Earlier you said you felt there was a sort of civil war going on. I have to say, I think that's slightly overstating the case. My experience is exactly as you've just described. There are a shrill minority on one pole, a shrill minority on the other extreme. And frankly, I think most Americans don't belong to either of those extremities. I think actually most Americans, most people that I've met in Mississippi are decent, reasonable people who want a better America. And I think part of the problem is the ultras who dominate the mainstream media, whether it's Fox News or CNN. They don't actually speak for most Americans.
They get the views and they get the clicks. That's why they're on there.